In London, one part gets the most attention: Central London. With all the world-famous tourist attractions and a history lasting thousands of years, it's often seen to be the most important part of London.
However, East London was pivotal in London's development, and it actually helped London to gain its position as a historical hub of international trade and finance.
These areas played host to many docks that enabled any international trade to come to most of the United Kingdom. Great Britain is an island, and the only land link from Great Britain to another country, the Eurotunnel, opened as recently as 28 years ago. The British Empire's worldwide expansion meant that all the riches from colonies, natural resources, spices, and exotic goods could be imported directly into London. But as the Second World War came and went, the Docklands slowly started to drop into decline, with the growth in average ship length and size causing the Port of London to move further down the Thames, far enough down that it was no longer technically London.
However, in the 1970s, the London's Docklands Development Corporation, or LDDC, was formed, which helped give the Docklands a new lease of life. In this mini-documentary, we'll be looking at 4 factors of the Docklands redevelopment: what caused the Docklands to be redeveloped, the plan created to redevelop the Docklands, the scientific and technical innovations that made the redevelopment possible, and finally trying to quantify whether the redevelopment was a success. I'm Felix, and this is Docklands Developed.
Yeah, we'll go to Stratford. I know what colour paint it is anyway, and I'm pricing it up, even if I'm getting a little pot, and then you can take it.
To understand why the Docklands needed to be redeveloped in the first place, we need to see what East London looked like in 1961. Over 130,000 people worked in port and dock transport, with over 60,000 people also working on the docks themselves. This was a massive industry, and it's difficult to comprehend how important it was given how many cities around the UK relied on water transport as one of their key employers and industries. So many cities in the UK have maritime heritage: Plymouth, Hull, Newcastle, Cardiff, Portsmouth, Southampton, Glasgow, Liverpool, and London all have significant parts of their history influenced by maritime trade. But after the Second World War, shipping had started to change. Containerization, where standardized containers were implemented worldwide to make global shipping easier and more efficient, meant a massive increase of space was required for the much larger equipment to work. The Docklands is a naturally constrained area, and navigation of large ships gets significantly more difficult the further into London you go. Having more than one large container ship in a London area of the Thames now would cause chaos. So the ports moved. Ports moved away from inland cities like London and Manchester, further out to closed-door locations like Heysham, Felixstowe, and in London's case, Tilbury. However, this caused a massive decline in the amount of people who were employed in port-based industries, not just in the Docklands, but across the UK. According to data published by the London School of Economics, over 125,000 people were employed in port and water transport in 1961, when the Docklands in East London was still being used as commercial docks. By 1981, just 20 years later, that had reduced to under 75,000 people employed in port and water transport, showing the magnitude of the labour decline that water transport was experiencing. One of the primary sources of work for the local population had disappeared, and the Docklands slowly started to fall into decay.
The government of the time had 2 practical options when it came to redeveloping the Docklands. The first option was to create a primarily industrial area, which still kept its working class characteristics, but the second option was to create a completely new business and commercially focused area, which also had tourist appeal. And owing to the Conservative administrations at the time's general beliefs on not really being pro-industrialisation, they went with the second option, to revitalise the Docklands.
The Docklands Joint Committee, or DJC, was formed as a consortium of government stakeholders in the area, essentially the Greater London Council and 5 borough councils. However, due to the fragile implementation of the organisation structure, the risk of it collapsing every election, and that once the initial strategic plan recommending roads and a tube line be built in 1976, nothing actually proceeded beyond that planning stage, the London Docklands Development Corporation, or LDDC, was formed. This organisation was more realistic, and started with smaller proposals first on an entire new tube line, which cost, naturally, a lot of money to build. Instead, they installed red brick roads which required little maintenance and enabled the new business zones to be set up quicker, and a frequent shuttle bus from Mile End Station as a temporary public transport fix, given that was the nearest public transport hub at the time, to the Docklands. These measures both succeeded, and somehow have managed to both survive the test of time. Red brick roads still exist and are renewed throughout the Docklands, and there are still regular buses running between the Docklands and Mile End. To increase the attractiveness of public transport, the Docklands Light Railway network was given approval in 1982, initially providing access to central London and the Eastern Rail hub of Stratford. This created a positive cycle where improvements were made, raising land value, and new developments built, further increasing attractiveness until the Docklands became seen as attractive enough for new office developments to fully take hold. London City Airport was also opened in 1987 as a further incentive for businesses to move, providing links to continental financial hubs without needing to travel to the other side of London to get to Heathrow Airport, which would have taken close to 2 hours of the transport network at the time. The DLR also opened in 1987, and because of the larger developments being proposed in the area, numerous extensions were proposed. Bank Station, with direct underground connections, was opened in 1990. Then, the Beckton Extension opened in 1994, the Lewisham Extension south of the river in 1999, and the London City Airport Extension in 2005. With smaller additions since then, this brings us to the DLR network that we have today, which brings high-quality rail public transport to the Docklands area. However, the forecasts of up to 150,000 people being employed in the area required a second rail link to be built to the Isle of Dogs, specifically the Jubilee Line extension. The line originally was meant to bypass the Docklands. In fact, there's an abandoned section of the Jubilee Line to Charing Cross, where it terminated before the extension opened and the line was diverted. The new extension connected both the Docklands and areas previously without rail links to central London, such as Bermondsey and North Greenwich, to the centre of the city, helping the Docklands to gain the proposed workforce and achieve that forecast of 150,000 people being employed.
The train now arriving at platform B is your westbound services to Paddington. Please stand behind the yellow light until the train has fully stopped. Once the train has stopped, please press a button on the door for the doors to open.
However, these developments in the local transport network would not have been possible were it not for certain scientific and technical developments applicable to transport that occurred throughout the 80s and 90s. The DLR is an automated railway, as anyone who has taken the opportunity to sit at the front would know. However, few people think about the signalling system that permits trains to operate without collisions. Installed nearly 30 years ago in 1944 by the French technology company Thales, the CellTrack system uses communications-based train control to remove the need for drivers, a group which has always had troubled industrial relations which can cause long-term service disruption, and add capacity to permit trains up to every minute in theory. The system works using fairly simple underlying logic. Each train has an onboard device, which lists virtual signals, stopping points, speed restrictions, and braking rates for each section of line the automated system is used on. On the track, sensors at regular intervals register a train's presence, with this information being reported to the train, the surrounding trains through radio, the system's central control centre, and then to the trains around it.
creating a safe operating environment and being a novel fix to many problems often faced on the railway. The Jubilee Line extension also made many architectural advancements and built stations to a capacity not seen before. For context, most of the previous extensions constructed were built to a fairly small scale, with all the post-war extensions featuring designs that were more focused on budget than capacity. You can immediately see this at 1970s and 80s Piccadilly Line stations beyond Hounslow to Heathrow. These stations are very shallow for underground stations, and there are few escalators. The exterior architecture of some of the stations could at best be described as in keeping with the surrounding industrial environment. When you compare those to the Jubilee Line extension, you can see that London Transport, the predecessor of TfL, adopted a massively different approach. The stations have massive amounts of capacity. Canary Wharf alone has 5 exits for just one tube line. Platform screen doors were also implemented at all the new underground stations, which increased safety by preventing people from falling onto the tracks, which also enable faster trains as they can remain at full line speed for longer. The Elizabeth Line, the latest transport link to open in the Docklands, having opened in May of last year, bringing direct trains to Woolwich, West London, Berkshire and even Reading, which, despite the tube maps insistent that it is right next to Uxbridge, is actually 35 kilometres away and nearly 70 kilometres from the Docklands. It also uses a unique combination of signalling systems, which hasn't always gone well. The older standard system throughout the UK, Train Protection Warning System or TPWS, is in use on the main lines out of central London. European Train Control System, or ECTS technology, is operational in the Heathrow Tunnel spur, and communications-based train control, similar to what the DLR uses, in the newly built underground section. This combination is part of the reason why the line is 4 years late, as some of the transition areas are passed through without stopping, yet the requirement to maintain running clearance on the line means that at least one system must be active at all times. However, the onboard systems on the new trains were later fixed to enable the line to open this year, with the only setback remaining to be the removal of the much maligned wait outside Paddington Station for trains to make their way into the tunnels, as currently there are certain trains that have to wait up to 7 minutes outside Paddington to slot into the 5-minute frequency within the city centre. These technological advances have helped to bring wider London to the Docklands as easily for most as getting to central London. But with all this new connectivity and development, have the conditions in the local area actually improved since the dock shut down in the 1960s? Have wages gone up in the local community? And what are people's personal perceptions and experiences with the Docklands? Could you quantify the overall development of the Docklands as a success or as a failure and revitalisation? Well, it's easier to look at it from a financial perspective first, given it's a quantifiable mathematical factor that a clear improvement can be measured upon. The easiest way to see if financial improvement in wages for the local area has occurred is to look at Office of National Statistics data, which is from the National Statistical Authority in the UK. This data is sorted by local authority area, which means that Tower Hamlets will be used for this comparison, being the most centrally and most economically productive area of the Docklands. In Tower Hamlets, the weekly wage in 1997 was £422, equating to an annual income of roughly £21,951, which, according to the latest figures available on the Bank of England's inflation calculator, leads to that being the equivalent of £39,687 in November 2022. However, in Newham, which is also in the Docklands but has had less overall development, the weekly wage was £315 in 1997, which equates to an annual income of roughly £16,380, and this being £29,615 at 2022 inflation rates. However, the resulting increase between these two is vastly different. Tower Hamlets, where Canary Wharf and the Isle of Dogs is, had a 2021 annual wage of £48,017, which in November 2022 is £54,536. Newham, without these developments, had a 2021 annual wage of just £31,657, with that being £35,955 in November 2022. There is a clear correlation between the successful development of the Docklands and the level of increase being twice as much in pure terms, and not far behind as a percentage either. But money isn't everything. The Docklands redevelopment does essentially hide the fact that the local people living in the East End of London for generations were displaced through the redevelopment not catering for the same sorts of industry-heavy jobs, only really for office-working, business-centric jobs. Was this fair to the local people? That's a really complicated question that would require delving into the demographics and history of the East End as a whole, going back hundreds of years, so we'll not be looking at that. But it's important to remember that worldwide, developments like the Docklands will always have one side that comes off worse because of it to some extent. However, I still believe that the Docklands is a shining example of a revitalisation story, especially when you consider the context of the UK at the time. You can see a financial improvement for the surrounding area, and the usage of land changing is somewhat of an inevitability in a city of 8 million people. Nothing is ever constant. The Docklands will continue to change over the future, that is certain, and there are many factors that could play into it. What will COVID's long-term effect be, and what will the new Elizabeth line actually change? But for now, this is where the Docklands is, and how it has changed over the past 40 years. Thank you for watching.